The divorce papers felt like silk between my fingers. Smooth, final, liberating. What is this? Ryan's voice cracked as he stared at the manila envelope I'd placed on his desk, his perfectly pressed suit suddenly seeming too tight around his shoulders. I smiled, and I knew it didn't reach my eyes. Your freedom and mine. 1 year ago, or was it a lifetime ago? I would have been crying, begging, explaining why he'd hurt me when he forgot our first anniversary, left me alone at the restaurant for 3 hours while I smiled apologetically at the pitying waitress, pretending my husband was just running late from work. 1 year ago, I would have accepted his excuses, his promises to do better, his casual dismissal of my pain. But that was before I died, before I woke up on our first anniversary morning with a second chance and the memories of 5 miserable years that hadn't happened yet. Claire, you can't be serious. Ryan stood, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor of his home office. It's our second anniversary today. This is some kind of joke, right? Are you upset I've been working late? I almost laughed. Almost. Because in my first life, I'd asked myself that same question for 5 years. Was I being unreasonable? Was I asking for too much? The answer, I'd learned the hard way, was no. Let me take you back to where it all began, both times. I met Ryan Ashford at a charity gala 3 years ago. I was 25, fresh from my promotion at Luminance Marketing, wearing a dress I'd saved 3 months to afford. He was 28, heir to Ashford Industries, and the most beautiful man I'd ever seen outside of a magazine cover. Dark hair that fell just perfectly across his forehead, gray eyes that seemed to see right through me, and a smile that made my knees weak. You look lost, he'd said, handing me a glass of champagne. I'm not, I'd replied, even though I absolutely was. My boss had sent me to network, and I was drowning in a sea of people who wore their wealth like a second skin. Good, then you can help me escape. These things bore me to tears. That's how it started. He was charming, attentive, interested in everything I had to say. He asked about my work, my dreams, my favorite books. He made me feel like I was the only person in the room, in the city, in the world. When he asked for my number, I felt like Cinderella at the ball. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, flowers delivered to my office. His mother, Margaret Ashford, looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her Louboutins, but Ryan assured me she'd come around. His father had passed away years ago, and Margaret ran Ashford Industries with an iron fist until Ryan was ready to take over. She's protective, Ryan explained, but she'll see what I see, that you're extraordinary. We married after 18 months of dating. It was a lavish affair at the Ashford estate with 400 bases, guests I didn't know, and a photographer who kept telling me to look more natural. Margaret wore white to my wedding. I should have seen it as the warning it was. The first few months were good. Great, even. Ryan came home at reasonable hours. We cooked dinner together, or rather, I cooked while he told me about his day, his plans to expand the company, his determination to prove himself to his mother and the board. I listened, supported, encouraged. That's what wives did, I thought. That's what love looked like. Then came our first anniversary. In my first life, I'd planned everything meticulously. Reservations at Marcella's, the Italian restaurant where we'd had our third date. I'd bought a new dress, deep blue, his favorite color. I'd gotten him a vintage watch I'd found at an estate sale, a Patek Philippe that had cost me 2 months' salary but was worth it to see his face light up. I arrived at Marcella's at 7 o'clock as planned. The hostess led me to our table, a quiet corner with a view of the city lights. I ordered water, checked my phone. Ryan had texted at 6:30. Running a bit late, be there soon. 7:30 came and went, 8 o'clock, 8:30. Would you like to order, ma'am? The waitress asked, her eyes full of the kind of pity that made my chest tight. Just a few more minutes, I said, smiling like my heart wasn't cracking with each passing second. At 9 o'clock, Ryan called, Claire, I'm so sorry. There's a crisis at work. The merger with Tecton is falling apart, and I need to stay here. I'll make it up to you, I promise. I went home alone, put the watch back in its box, and cried myself to sleep in the blue dress. He came home at 2 in the morning, kissed my forehead without waking me, and was gone before I woke up. When I finally confronted him 2 days later, he was apologetic but dismissive. You know how important this merger is. I told you things would be busy. I'll take you somewhere nice this weekend. We never went anywhere that weekend, or the next, or the next. That's how it started. The slow erosion of our marriage, the death by 1,000 small cuts. Forgotten dates, canceled plans, promises that dissolved like sugar in rain. And through it all, I told myself it would get better. He was under pressure. He was building his career. He loved me, even if he didn't always show it. I was a fool. The years that followed our first anniversary were a masterclass in diminishing returns. Ryan became CEO of Ashford Industries on our second anniversary. We celebrated with a company party attended by 300 people. He gave a speech thanking his mother, his team, the board. He didn't mention me once. When I pointed this out later, he said, "You know, I appreciate you. I don't need to broadcast it to the world." Year 3, I found out I was pregnant. I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. Maybe a baby would bring us closer, I thought. Maybe this was what we needed. Lost the baby at 11 weeks. Ryan was in Singapore on business. He sent flowers and called once, but his mother was the one who took me to the hospital, held my hand through the procedure, and drove me home in stony silence. I think it was the only kind thing Margaret ever did for me, and she never mentioned it again. Year 4, I stopped trying. I stopped making dinner. I stopped waiting up. I stopped hoping. I threw myself into my work, got promoted to senior director, led campaigns that won awards Ryan didn't notice. Year 5, I found the texts. Her name was Sophia Chen, a junior executive at a competitor firm. The messages weren't overtly sexual, but they were intimate in a way that cut deeper than physical infidelity. Inside jokes, late-night conversations about dreams and fears, the kind of emotional connection I'd been begging Ryan for, and he'd insisted he didn't have time to give. When I confronted him, he was genuinely surprised by my anger. "It's not an affair, Claire. We're just friends. You're being paranoid. You talk to her more than you talk to me. Because you're always upset with me. Sophia doesn't nag. She understands the pressures I'm under." That's when I knew. I was the villain in his story. The demanding wife, the burden, the obligation. And Sophia was the breath of fresh air, the escape, the one who understood him. I filed for divorce the next day. The process was brutal. Margaret hired a team of lawyers who tried to prove I was after the Ashford fortune, despite the prenup I'd signed without reading. Ryan played the victim, telling anyone who would listen that I'd abandoned him during the most stressful time of his life. Sophia sent me a message. "I hope you know this is all your fault. If you'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have needed someone else." The divorce was finalized on what would have been our 6th anniversary. I signed the papers, took my maiden name back, and moved into a small apartment across town. I was 31 years old, exhausted and hollow. 2 months later, I was walking home from work when a drunk driver ran a red light. I remember the impact, the way the world spun and my body felt weightless. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I'd left my office plants unwatered. I remember the darkness closing in, soft and final. And then I woke up. The first thing I noticed was the sunlight, warm and golden, streaming through white curtains I recognized. The second thing was Ryan's arm draped across my waist, his breathing deep and even beside me. I shot up in bed, heart hammering, and looked around. This was our bedroom in the penthouse apartment, the one we'd moved into right after the wedding, the one we'd left 2 years into our marriage for a house in the suburbs that Ryan's mother insisted we buy. My phone sat on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a notification. I grabbed it with shaking hands. Wednesday, June 14th, our first anniversary. "Impossible," whispered. What's impossible?" Ryan's voice was thick with sleep. He pulled me back down, nuzzling into my neck in a way that made my entire body freeze. "Come back to bed. We don't have to be up for another hour." I lay rigid in his arms, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. I died. I remembered dying. I remembered the divorce, the years of loneliness, the accident. But here I was, in a moment I'd lived before with a man I'd spent years trying to stop loving. Claire, you okay? Ryan propped himself up on one elbow, his gray eyes filled with sleepy concern. In this moment, he looked so much like the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who'd made me laugh and feel seen and special. But I knew better now. I'm fine, I managed. Just thinking about tonight. His face brightened. The reservation at Marcella's. I'm looking forward to it. We haven't been back there since that amazing dinner we had. Right, I said slowly. You're definitely still planning to come? Of course. Why wouldn't I? He kissed my forehead and got out of bed, stretching. I know work has been crazy with the Tecton merger, but I promise, tonight is about us. The Tecton merger. The crisis that had kept him from our anniversary dinner. It was going to happen again. He was going to choose work, make excuses, break my heart in that quiet, devastating way. Unless I changed something. I spent the morning in a daze, going through motions I remembered but felt disconnected from. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done in my first life. I needed time to think, to process, to figure out if I was experiencing an incredibly vivid dream or if something impossible had actually happened. I Googled second chances and rebirth and time travel and felt ridiculous. But the more I looked around, the more I remembered specific details that lined up perfectly. The coffee stain on the kitchen counter from yesterday morning, the argument Ryan had mentioned about his mother wanting him to fire someone in accounting, the weather report predicting rain tonight. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. By noon, I'd accepted the impossible truth. I'd been given a second chance. I'd lived 5 years of marriage, divorced, died, and somehow woken up on my first anniversary with all my memories intact. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I could hear my mother's voice in my head, the advice she'd given me before my wedding. Marriage is work, Claire. There will be hard times. But if you love each other, you fight for it. I'd fought. For 5 years, I'd fought alone while Ryan drifted further away, more invested in his career and eventually in another woman than in our marriage. But that was the future. This was now, a point where things could still change. If I knew what was coming, couldn't I prevent it? Couldn't I be different, communicate better, not let the small wounds fester into fatal ones? I made a list, like I did for work. Campaigns, problems in the marriage, first life, Ryan prioritizing work over our relationship. Lack of communication about feelings and needs, Margaret's interference and Ryan's inability to set boundaries, growing emotional distance. My own tendency to people please and not advocate for myself. The pregnancy loss that we never properly grieved together, Ryan's emotional affair with Sophia, possible solutions, second life. Set clear boundaries early, communicate needs directly and immediately, encourage Ryan to establish independence from Margaret, prioritize quality time and make it non-negotiable, stand up for myself and my worth, avoid pregnancy until marriage is stable. I stared at number 7 for a long time. How did I prevent something that hadn't happened yet? And more importantly, did I want to save this marriage or did I want to save myself? The watch sat on the dresser where I'd placed it that morning, beautifully wrapped. 2 months of my salary. I picked it up, feeling its weight, remembering how excited I'd been to give it to him in my first life. How sure I'd been that this gift, this gesture, would show him how much I loved him. He'd thanked me politely and put it in his drawer. I'd found it there, still in its box, when I was packing to leave 5 years later. I put the watch back down. At 5 o'clock, Ryan called. Hey, honey, listen, we have a problem with the Tecton merger. The CFO is threatening to pull out, and I need to smooth things over. I might be a little late to dinner. My heart clenched, not with the pain of my first life, but with the bitter satisfaction of being right. Everything was playing out exactly as before. How late? I asked, my voice calm. Maybe 30 minutes? An hour tops. I'll be there, I promise. In my first life, I'd said, okay, I understand. Just text me when you're on your way. I'd made it easy for him to let me down. Ryan, I said slowly. This is our first anniversary. I made these reservations 3 months ago. I bought a new dress. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. I know, and we'll celebrate. I just need to handle this one thing. It's always one thing, one crisis, one meeting, one call. I was surprised by how steady my voice was. I need you to be honest with me. Are you planning to come to dinner tonight, or are you going to choose work? There was a pause. In that silence, I could hear everything: surprise, irritation, the mental calculations of a man trying to appease two priorities. That's not fair, Claire. You know how important this merger is. And you know how important our marriage is, or you should. Are you giving me an ultimatum? Because that's not how we solve problems. Something inside me shifted. In my first life, I would have backed down, apologized for being demanding. But I'd lived through the consequences of always being accommodating, always understanding, always putting his needs above my own. Not an ultimatum. I said, just clarity. I'll be at Marcella's at 7. I hope you'll join me. I hung up before he could respond. I didn't wear the blue dress. Instead, I wore black. Simple, elegant. The kind of dress that made me feel powerful rather than pretty. I arrived at Marcella's at exactly 7 o'clock. The hostess greeted me warmly. Mrs. Ashford, your table is ready. I followed her to the same corner table, ordered a glass of wine, and waited. 7:15, 7:30, 7:45. But this time, I wasn't crying. I wasn't checking my phone every 30 seconds. I wasn't shrinking under the pitying looks from other diners. Instead, I people-watched, drank my wine, and thought about what I wanted. The answer surprised me with its simplicity. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to be with someone who chose me, consistently and without hesitation. I wanted a partner, not a project. At 8 o'clock, Ryan finally called. I let it go to voicemail. At 8:30, he called again. This time I answered. Claire, I'm so sorry. Save it, I interrupted me. I know exactly what you're going to say. There was a crisis. You couldn't get away. You'll make it up to me, right? Well, yes, but it's true. The CFO, Ryan, I don't care about the CFO. I care about the fact that on our first anniversary, you chose a meeting over dinner with your wife. That's not fair. This is my career, my company's future. And I'm your wife, or at least I'm supposed to be. I took a breath. I'm going home. We'll talk when you get there. I ended the call, paid for my wine, and left. The apartment was dark when I got home. I didn't turn on the lights. Instead, I sat in the living room, still in my black dress, and waited. Ryan came home at 11:30. Claire? He found me in the darkness, flipped on the light. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled. Why are you sitting in the dark? Thinking, I said. He sat across from me, guilt written across his face. I really am sorry. The Tecton deal is going to fall apart anyways, I finished. In about 3 months, you'll find out their financials were misrepresented and the merger will collapse. All this stress, all this work for nothing. He blinked. What? I couldn't tell him the truth, but I could tell him my truth. I had a dream last night, a long, terrible dream about our future. We grew apart, Ryan. You chose work over and over, and I chose to accept it because I loved you, and I thought that's what a good wife did. We stopped talking, stopped connecting. I lost a baby, and you weren't there. You had an emotional affair with a woman who made you feel understood in ways I apparently couldn't. And eventually, we divorced. Ryan's face had gone pale. Claire, that was just a dream. A nightmare. That's not us. Isn't it? I leaned forward. You missed our first anniversary dinner. Tonight proved that when it comes down to it, work will always win. And maybe that's okay for you. Maybe you need a wife who's fine with that, but I'm not. What are you saying? I stood, suddenly exhausted. I'm saying that I love you, Ryan. but I love myself more, and I won't spend the next 5 years or even the next 5 days being an afterthought in your life. So what, you want a divorce? Over one missed dinner? No, I said quietly. I want you to think about what you want. Really think about it. Not what your mother wants, not what the company needs, but what you want. Because I've already decided what I want, which is a partner, an equal, someone who shows up. I walked past him toward the bedroom. You have until tomorrow to decide if you can be that person. I left him standing in the living room, and for the first time in my entire marriage, both lifetimes, I felt like I'd finally spoken my truth. I woke up to an empty bed. For a moment, panic seized me. Had he left? But then I heard sounds from the kitchen, the smell of coffee brewing. I found Ryan sitting at the kitchen island, still in yesterday's clothes, 2 mugs of coffee in front of him. He looked like he hadn't slept. Hi, he said softly. Hi. I've been thinking. He pushed a mug toward me. All night, actually, about what you said. I sat down, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. You're right, he continued. About all of it. I missed our anniversary because I convinced myself the Tecton merger was more important. And if I'm honest, it's not the first time I've done something like that. Even before we got married, there were dates I rescheduled, weekends I cut short. I told myself you understood, that you were okay with it. I was okay with it, I admitted. I convinced myself that supporting your career was supporting you, that being understanding meant accepting crumbs instead of asking for what I needed. What do you need? It was such a simple question, but it felt revolutionary. When had he last asked me that? I need you to be present, I said. Not just physically, but emotionally. I need to know that our marriage is a priority, not just something that exists in the background of your real life. I need you to set boundaries with work, with your mother, with anyone who tries to come between us. My mother? He frowned. She doesn't like me, Ryan. She's never liked me. And you've never defended me or established that we're a unit. He was quiet for a long moment. She did make that comment at the wedding, about you marrying up. I told myself she was just being protective, but you're right, I should have shut it down immediately. And Sophia Chen, I added, watching his face carefully. His expression shifted to confusion. Who? Right. In this timeline, he hadn't met her yet. The merger was still in progress, and Sophia worked for Tecton. If the merger failed, as I knew it would, they might never meet at all. Never mind, I said. The point is, I need you to be all in. And if you can't do that, then we need to be honest about it now, not 5 years from now. Ryan reached across the island and took my hand. I want to try, really try. I got so caught up in proving myself, to the board, to my mother, to myself, that I forgot the whole point of any of it was to build a life with you. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But I'd heard similar promises before in my first life, and they'd meant nothing. Actions, I said. Not words. Show me. I will. He squeezed my hand. Starting today, I'm calling in sick. We're celebrating our anniversary the way we should have yesterday. You can't just call in sick the day after missing our anniversary. I don't care how it looks. You're right that I need to set boundaries. This is me setting one. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. I listened as he explained he'd be out for the day, that any emergencies could go through his VP, that he'd check emails in the evening. When he hung up, he looked almost surprised by what he'd done. There, he said. Done. Okay. So. He smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way that made my heart ache. Let's start over. Happy anniversary, Claire. I love you, and I'm sorry I didn't show it yesterday. We spent the day together. He took me to brunch at a little cafe we'd discovered during our dating days, but hadn't been back to since the wedding. We walked through the botanical gardens, his hand in mine, talking about everything and nothing. He asked about my work, really asked, and actually listened. He told me about the pressures he was under and admitted he'd been drowning but too proud to say so. It felt like falling in love again. Or maybe it felt like getting to know someone I'd married without really knowing. That night, he made dinner, badly burning the chicken and oversalting the vegetables, but the gesture meant everything. We laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in longer than I could remember. "I got you something?" he said after dinner, pulling out a small wrapped box. I opened it to find a bracelet, delicate silver with a small charm in the shape of a book. Our first date had been at a bookstore cafe. "I remembered you looking at this in that jewelry store near the office," he said. "I went back and bought it weeks ago. I was going to give it to you last night, but you were busy saving a merger that's going to fail anyway," I finished. He winced. "You really think it'll fall apart?" "I know it will. Bad financials, misrepresented earnings. It'll come out in about 12 weeks. "How can you possibly know that?" I couldn't tell him about my rebirth, about living 5 years that hadn't happened yet. So instead I said, "Let's just say I have good instincts about these things. You should start distancing yourself from the deal now before it reflects poorly on you." He studied me for a long moment. "You're different today, more assertive." "Maybe I'm just done pretending to be someone I'm not." "I like it," he said softly. "I've spent so much time trying to be the person my mother wants, the CEO everyone expects. Maybe we both need to stop performing and just be." We made love that night, and it was different than it had been in months. Present, connected, intimate in a way that went beyond the physical. Afterward, as Ryan slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I'd actually changed anything or if I was just delaying the inevitable. For 3 weeks, things were good. Ryan came home at reasonable hours. We had dinner together. He set up a standing date night, Fridays non-negotiable. He even had a conversation with his mother where he established that our marriage was our business, though he came home from that dinner looking like he'd been through a war. "She thinks you've brainwashed me," he said, loosening his tie, "that I'm losing focus on what matters." And what matters to her? The company, the family legacy, making sure the Ashford name stays synonymous with success. He poured himself a scotch. "She said you're distracting me." "And what did you say?" "That you're my wife and she needs to respect that." He took a long drink. "She's not happy with me right now." Margaret Ashford not being happy was apparently a serious problem. Over the following days, Ryan's phone rang constantly with calls from board members, family friends, and business associates, all clearly prompted by Margaret to check in on Ryan and remind him of his responsibilities. "She's orchestrating a campaign," I said, watching him field another call. "She's trying to overwhelm you into submission." "That's just how she is. She's passionate about the company." "No, Ryan, she's controlling, and she's using guilt and pressure to manipulate you." He bristled. "That's my mother you're talking about." "I know, and I also know that until you establish real independence from her, she's going to keep interfering in our marriage." It was our first real argument since my rebirth, and I could see the patterns forming already. Him defensive, me frustrated, both of us retreating into familiar corners. This was how it started last time, I thought. The slow pull away from each other. But I had one advantage this time. I knew exactly what was coming. "The Tecton financials are going to be revealed as fraudulent next week," I said, changing the subject. "On Thursday specifically. Their CFO is going to resign and the SEC is going to open an investigation." Ryan stared at me. "Claire, how could you possibly—" "I can't explain how I know, but I do. And if you're still heavily involved in that merger when it happens, it's going to damage your reputation. You need to distance yourself now." "That's insane. We've been working on this for months. The board is going to expect you to have good judgment," I interrupted. "Trust me on this, please." He didn't. Of course he didn't. Why would he trust my inexplicable certainty about future events over months of work and due diligence? The following Thursday, the news broke. Tecton's CFO resigned amid allegations of financial fraud. Their earnings had been inflated by over 40%. The SEC opened an investigation. The merger collapsed. Ryan came home that night looking like he'd aged 5 years in a day. "You were right," he said, slumping onto the couch. "How did you know?" "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. Claire, are you—" He laughed, but it was hollow. "Are you psychic? Did you hire a private investigator? What's going on?" I sat beside him. "I told you I had a dream about our future. That dream was very detailed. I know things about what's coming because I've lived through them once already." "That's impossible." "I know, but it's true." I took his hand. "Ryan, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I died. In another timeline, another life. I lived 5 years of our marriage, watched it fall apart, got divorced, and then I was in an accident. When I woke up, it was our first anniversary morning, and I had all my memories of those 5 years." He pulled his hand away, standing up. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking. How else would I know about Tecton? How else would I know that your mother is going to try to set you up with Harrison Tech's daughter at the gala next month? How else would I know that you're going to get a call from Andrew Peterson next Tuesday asking you to join his startup as COO?" Ryan's face went white. "Andrew Peterson is married to my cousin. He hasn't even started his company yet. That information isn't public." "It will be. On Tuesday." We stared at each other across the living room. I could see him trying to reconcile the logical impossibility of what I was saying with the evidence that I somehow knew things I shouldn't. "Even if what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "even if you somehow lived 5 years that haven't happened yet, why are you still here? If we got divorced, if it was that bad, why didn't you leave the moment you woke up?" "Because I loved you," I said simply. "I wanted to believe we could be different this time. That if I changed, if you changed, we could save what we had. And now? Now I don't know. We're already falling into the same patterns. You're defensive about your mother. I'm frustrated about being second priority to your career. And I know exactly where this road leads. So what do we do? We get help, couples therapy, real intensive therapy, or—" I took a breath. "We acknowledge that some things aren't meant to be saved." Dr. Ellen Reeves was a renowned couples therapist with kind eyes and an uncanny ability to cut through bullshit. Ryan found her after a week of research, and we started sessions twice a week. "Tell me," Dr. Reeves said in our first session, "what brings you here?" Ryan and I exchanged glances. How did we explain that I'd lived through our divorce in a timeline that no longer existed? "Communication issues," I said finally. "And fear," Ryan added. "Fear that we're heading toward divorce." Dr. Reeves nodded, unsurprised. "Most couples who come to me are. The question is, do you both want to prevent it?" "Yes," Ryan said immediately. I hesitated. "I want to be happy. If that's with Ryan, yes. If it's not, then I want us both to be honest enough to acknowledge it." Over the following weeks, therapy sessions became a space where we finally said things we'd been avoiding. Ryan admitted that he'd used work as an escape, a way to feel successful and in control when other parts of his life felt uncertain. I admitted that I'd made myself small, accommodating, afraid that taking up space would make me unlovable. "Your mother," Dr. Reeves said to Ryan during one session. "Tell me about your relationship with her." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "She's formidable. After my father died, she kept the company going through sheer force of will. She's the strongest person I know." "And how does she view your marriage?" "She thinks Claire is a distraction." "A distraction from what?" "From my responsibilities. From becoming the leader she thinks I should be." Reeves turned to me. "Claire, how does that make you feel?" Like I'm competing with a ghost, I said. Not just Ryan's father, but this idealized version of who Ryan is supposed to be according to Margaret. And I can't win that competition because the goalposts keep moving. Ryan, can you see how your mother's influence creates a triangle in your marriage? Instead of you and Claire as a unit, it's you trying to balance between two women who want different things from you. I love my mother, Ryan said defensively. Love isn't the issue. Boundaries are. As long as you're more concerned with your mother's approval than your wife's happiness, this marriage will struggle. It was harsh, but true. And over time, Ryan began to see it too. The real breakthrough came during a session about 6 weeks in. Claire, Dr. Reeves said, you've mentioned several times that you know what's going to happen, that you have this certainty about future events. Can you tell me more about that? I looked at Ryan, who nodded slightly. We'd agreed to be completely honest in therapy, even about the impossible stuff. So I told her everything. The 5 years of marriage, the divorce, my death, waking up on our first anniversary. I expected her to look at me like I was crazy, to recommend a psychiatrist. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and said, whether this is a literal second chance or your subconscious giving you the insight you need, it's powerful. You have knowledge that most people in struggling marriages would kill for. You know exactly where your patterns lead. The question is, are you both willing to break those patterns? Yes, Ryan said firmly. I want to be, I admitted. But I'm scared. I'm scared that even knowing what I know, even trying as hard as we are, it won't be enough. That's a valid fear, Dr. Reeves said. Change is hard, especially when you're fighting against established dynamics. But here's what I observe. You're both showing up. You're both being vulnerable. That's not nothing. As we left that session, Ryan took my hand. I know I keep saying this, but I really am trying. I talked to the board yesterday about scaling back my hours. I'm delegating more, and I'm having another conversation with my mother this weekend. What kind of conversation? The kind where I tell her that she can either respect you and our marriage, or she can have limited contact with me. I'm done trying to make everyone happy at your expense. The conversation with Margaret happened at her estate, a sprawling mansion that always made me feel like I was being judged for breathing wrong. Ryan had invited me to come, but I'd declined. This was something he needed to do alone. He came home 3 hours later, looking exhausted but oddly peaceful. How did it go? I asked. She said I was throwing away my legacy for a woman who'll leave me the moment things get hard. He poured us both wine. She said, you're calculating that you planned this whole thing to isolate me from my family. My heart sank. Ryan. I told her she was wrong, he continued. I told her that you're the only person who's been honest with me about what I need to change. That you've stood by me even when I gave you every reason to leave, and that if she can't respect my wife, then she's not welcome in our home. I stared at him. You actually said that? I did. She's furious. She threatened to use her board influence against me to make things difficult at the company. I told her to do what she felt she needed to do, but that my marriage isn't negotiable. I set down my wine glass and hugged him, fighting back tears. In my first life, this conversation had never happened. He'd always chosen his mother, always found a way to justify her behavior or blame me for being too sensitive. Thank you, I whispered. You don't need to thank me for choosing you, he said. That should be the baseline. Over the following months, things shifted. Not perfectly, we still had arguments, still struggled with old habits trying to reassert themselves. But there was a fundamental difference. We were fighting for our marriage together instead of against each other. Ryan's career shifted too. After distancing himself from the Tecton disaster, he was actually seen as having good judgment. He restructured his role, hired a COO to handle day-to-day operations, and focused on strategy. He came home at reasonable hours. We had dinner together most nights. Margaret kept her distance, though she made her disapproval known through pointed comments at family events we couldn't avoid. Ryan stood firm. She'll come around, he said after one particularly tense family dinner. Or she won't, I replied, and that'll be her loss. By our second anniversary, we were in a completely different place than my first life. We were talking, connecting, building something real instead of play acting at marriage. But I still had the divorce papers. I'd filled them out weeks ago, kept them in a folder in my office drawer, insurance maybe, or a reminder that I had options, that I wasn't trapped. The night before our second anniversary, I took them out and looked at them. In my first life, I'd filed these papers on this date, exhausted and heartbroken and done with trying. Now, a year after my rebirth, I had a choice to make. Ryan came home early on our second anniversary carrying flowers and a smile. "I have a surprise," he said. "Pack a bag. We're going away for the weekend." "Ryan, I have work already handled. I talked to your boss. You're off until Monday." He'd booked us a cabin in the mountains, secluded and beautiful. No phones, no internet, no interruptions. Just us. We arrived at sunset, the sky painted in oranges and pinks. Ryan had arranged for the cabin to be stocked with groceries, wine, and a ridiculous amount of books, a nod to our first date. "This is perfect," I said, meaning it. That weekend, we talked about everything: our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. Ryan admitted he'd been terrified of failing, of being compared to his father and found wanting. I admitted I'd been afraid of being too much, of asking for things and being told I was demanding. "I want kids," Ryan said on Saturday night as we sat by the fireplace. "But not yet. Not until I know we're solid, not until you know we're solid." In my first life, I'd been pregnant by our second anniversary. We'd lost the baby, and it had destroyed something between us: the grief we couldn't share, the blame that went unspoken, the distance that became insurmountable. "I want kids too," I said. "Oh, when we're ready, when we're both sure." "Are you sure? About us, I mean?" I thought about the question. Was I sure? Could I ever be, knowing what I knew about how wrong things could go? "I'm sure that we're trying," I said finally. "I'm sure that this version of us is different than the one I lived before. I'm sure that I don't regret giving us this second chance." "But," he heard the hesitation, "but I also know that good intentions aren't always enough. And I'm not going to stay if we fall back into old patterns. I love you, Ryan, but I love myself more." "Good," he said, pulling me close. "You should. And I'm going to keep earning your trust every day, for as long as it takes." Sunday morning, I woke up to find Ryan already awake, watching me. "What?" I asked, self-conscious. "I was just thinking about what you said. About your dream or vision or whatever it was. About living those 5 years and then getting a second chance." "Yeah. If it's true, if you really did live through our divorce, then you came back anyway. You didn't run. You could have left the moment you woke up, filed for divorce, protected yourself. But you stayed. You fought. Why?" I sat up, pulling the blanket around me. "Because I needed to know. I needed to know if we failed because we were fundamentally incompatible or because we were two people who didn't know how to fight for each other. In my first life, I blamed myself for not being enough. I needed to know if there was a version of us that could work." "And do you know now?" "I think so. This version, where we're both trying, where we're honest and vulnerable and willing to change, this version works. But it requires constant effort. The moment we get complacent, the moment we stop choosing each other, we'll start sliding back." "Then we don't get complacent," Ryan said simply. "We keep choosing each other." We drove home Sunday evening in comfortable silence. When we arrived at the apartment, Ryan carried our bags inside while I checked the mail. There was an envelope from Ashford Industries. I opened it to find a letter from the board, signed by Margaret among others. They were offering me a position, Director of Public Relations, with a significant salary and direct report to the CEO. "Ryan," I called, "did you know about this?" He came into the living room, saw the letter, and frowned. "No, what is it?" I showed him. He read it twice, his expression darkening. "This is my mother," he said. "This is her trying to control you, to bring you into the company where she can monitor you and make sure you're not distracting me. Or," I said slowly, "it's an olive branch. Maybe she's trying in her own dysfunctional way to accept me." By trying to control your career? By acknowledging that I'm part of your life and finding a way to deal with it. Ryan looked skeptical. You're not seriously considering taking it? I don't know. It's a good opportunity. Better title, better pay than what I have now. And you'd be working under my mother's thumb, with her using your job as leverage anytime we don't do what she wants. He had a point, but there was something else to consider. In my first life, I never worked at Ashford Industries. I kept my career separate, and it created this divide, your world and my world, never overlapping. Maybe that was part of the problem. Or maybe healthy boundaries were the only thing keeping us sane. We debated it for days. Ott Reeves encouraged me to think about my motivations. Was I doing this to prove something to Margaret, to save my marriage, or because I genuinely wanted the job? In the end, I declined. Not because Ryan asked me to, but because I realized that I'd spent too much of my life, both lives, shaping myself around other people's expectations. I had a career I'd built myself, success that was mine alone. I didn't need Margaret's approval or her olive branch. I did, however, suggest that Ryan and I have dinner with Margaret. Neutral territory, just the three of us. She was late, of course. Some things never, changed. Margaret Ashford arrived at the restaurant in a cloud of expensive perfume and barely concealed disdain. She was impeccably dressed, as always, her silver hair styled perfectly. Claire, she said, her tone making my name sound like an accusation. Margaret, thank you for coming. We sat in painful silence until the waiter took our orders. Then Margaret turned to Ryan. I assume this dinner is about the job offer Claire declined. Actually, Wasamada said before Ryan could answer. It's not. I wanted to thank you for the offer and explain why I said no. Margaret's perfectly shaped eyebrow rose. This should be interesting. I said no because I need to maintain my independence. Not from Ryan, but for myself. I've built a career I'm proud of, and I want to keep building it on my own terms. I took a breath. But I also wanted to tell you that I understand why you're protective of Ryan. You lost your husband, kept his legacy alive, raised a son who's now an incredible CEO. That's not easy, and I'm not trying to take him away from that. Could have fooled me, Margaret said coldly. Ever since you came into his life, his priorities have shifted. Because they needed to, Ryan interjected. Mom, I was drowning. I was working 80-hour weeks, never sleeping, never having a life outside of the office. That's not sustainable and it's not healthy. Your father managed it. Dad had a heart attack at 52, Ryan said quietly. He died at his desk. Is that really what you want for me? Margaret's composure cracked just for a moment. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Dad dying wasn't fair. You having to take over the company wasn't fair. Me feeling like I have to choose between you and my wife isn't fair, but here we are. I just want what's best for you. I know, but what's best for me includes Claire. It includes having a life outside of work. It includes setting boundaries with you. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. I was young when your father died, younger than Claire is now. And everyone told me I couldn't run the company, that I should sell, that I wasn't capable. So I worked myself to the bone, proving them wrong. I sacrificed everything, time with you, my health, any chance at happiness, to keep the Ashford name strong. I know, Mom. And now you're CEO and you're good at it, better than I expected, honestly. But you're also pulling back, delegating, leaving at 5 o'clock, and it terrifies me. Why? Because I'm afraid you'll lose everything I worked for, that without that complete dedication, it'll all fall apart. Or, I said gently, maybe Ryan can be successful and happy. Maybe those things aren't mutually exclusive. Margaret looked at me, really looked at me, for perhaps the first time since we'd met. He does seem happy, she admitted grudgingly. Happier than he's been in years. He is, I confirmed. And if I keep fighting this, I'll push him away completely. Probably, I agreed. Ryan reached across the table and took his mother's hand. I love you, Mom. I'm grateful for everything you did, everything you sacrificed, but I need to do things my way. And that includes having Claire as my partner, not an obstacle to work around. Margaret nodded slowly. I suppose I can't expect you to make the same mistakes I did. It wasn't an apology or a warm embrace, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a beginning. We finished dinner in less hostile silence. As we were leaving, Margaret touched my arm. Claire, the job offer stands should you ever change your mind. But I understand your decision. Thank you. And I'm glad Ryan has you, even if I'm terrible at showing it. It was the closest thing to approval I was likely to get from Margaret Ashford. I'd take it. 6 months after our second anniversary, Dr. Reeves pronounced us graduated from therapy. You've done the work, she said. You've broken old patterns, established new ones, and built a foundation of real communication. That doesn't mean you won't have problems. All couples do. But you now have the tools to handle them. Ryan and I celebrated with dinner at Marcella's. Full circle. Remember our first anniversary? Ryan said, raising his glass. Which one? I asked Riley. He laughed. Fair point. But in both timelines, this restaurant was significant. In the first one, I wasn't here. In this one, I am. That matters. We clinked glasses. Around us, other couples ate and talked and celebrated their own milestones. I wondered how many of them were happy, truly happy, and how many were just going through the motions. I never asked, Ryan said. What happened to the divorce papers? I'd been wondering when he'd bring this up. They're in my office drawer. I filled them out on our second anniversary, the day you surprised me with the cabin trip. Why didn't you file them? Because I realized something that weekend. In my first life, I filed for divorce out of exhaustion and heartbreak. I was done. But in this life, I don't feel done. I feel like we're just beginning. But you kept the papers. I did. Because I needed to know I had a choice, that I wasn't staying out of fear or obligation, but because I actively chose to. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. He was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something? Always. I'm glad you came back. However it happened, dream, vision, time travel, whatever. I'm grateful. Because the man you woke up next to on our first anniversary, he was an idiot. He had an incredible wife, and he took her completely for granted. He thought success meant hours at the office and approval from his mother, and he was so focused on that he couldn't see what actually mattered. And what matters? This. Us. Building a life together that we both want to live. Coming home to someone who knows me, really knows me, and loves me. Anyway, having a partner who calls me on my shit and pushes me to be better. I do love you, I said. Not the version of you I imagined or hoped for, but the real you, the one who tries and fails and tries again, the one who's learning to set boundaries and be vulnerable. That's the man I choose. Even knowing how badly I messed up before, especially knowing that. Because it means I go into this with my eyes open, not with rose-colored glasses. We finished dinner and walked home through the city streets, his hand in mine. It was a crisp October night, the kind that made me think about the changing seasons, about time passing and choices made. When we got home, I went to my office and opened the drawer. The divorce papers were still there, exactly where I'd left them. I picked them up, looked at them one last time, and then fed them through the shredder. Ryan stood in the doorway, watching. You're sure? I'm sure, not because our marriage is perfect, or because I think we'll never have problems, but because we're both committed to doing the work, and that's all anyone can really ask for. He crossed the room and kissed me, soft and sweet and full of promise. Thank you, he whispered, for coming back, for giving us this second chance. Thank you for being worth it. 3 years later, I'm writing this from the nursery of our new house, watching my daughter sleep in her crib. Emma Ryan Ashford, 3 months old, with her father's gray eyes and my stubborn chin. Ryan and I struggled with whether to have children. The memory of my first pregnancy, the loss, the grief that had driven us apart, it haunted me. But Dr. Reeves helped us work through it, helped us understand that this pregnancy would be different because we were different. And it was. Ryan came to every appointment, rubbed my feet when they swelled, held my hair when morning sickness hit. When Emma was born, he cried, actually cried, holding her tiny body against his chest. "Hello, little one," he'd whispered. "I promise to be the dad you deserve. Present, patient, and completely devoted." He's kept that promise. He leaves work at 4 now, refuses to take calls after 6. Margaret, surprisingly, has been supportive. She babysits once a week, and I've caught her softly singing to Emma in Italian, tears in her eyes. "I wish I'd done this with Ryan," she admitted once. "Really been present, not just providing for him. You're giving Emma a gift." I think about my first life often. The Claire who lived through 5 years of slow heartbreak, who divorced and died believing she'd failed at marriage. I wish I could tell her that she didn't fail. She just married the wrong version of Ryan at the wrong time. This Ryan, the one who shows up and tries and chooses us every day, he's the man I was always waiting for. He just needed to grow into himself. And I needed to learn to ask for what I deserve, Saved. Sometimes I wonder why I got this second chance. Why me and not all Betguas? The other people living in unhappy marriages making the same mistakes I did? I don't have an answer. Maybe there's no reason. Maybe I just got lucky. But I know this. I'm not wasting it. Every day I wake up and actively choose this life. Not because it's perfect. It's not. We still argue about his work schedule sometimes, about how much time Emma spends with Margaret, about 1,000 little things that couples argue about. But we argue as partners, not enemies. We fight for our marriage, not against each other. And when I go to bed at night, Ryan's arm around me, Emma's baby monitor on the nightstand, I know I made the right choice. Not just in giving him a second chance, but in giving myself one. The divorce papers are long gone, shredded and forgotten. In their place is something much more valuable, a marriage built on truth, effort, and genuine partnership. Some love stories are about destiny, about two people who are meant to be together from the start. Ours is about choice, the choice to show up, to be better, to keep trying even when it's hard. And that, I've learned, is the most powerful kind of love story there is. The kind you build, brick by brick, day by day, with someone who's willing to build it with you. Ryan comes into the nursery, moving quietly so he doesn't wake Emma. "Hey," he whispers, "you okay?" "Perfect," I say, meaning it. Absolutely perfect. He wraps his arms around me from behind, and we stand there, watching our daughter sleep, this tiny human we created from the wreckage of our first timeline and the promise of our second. "Happy anniversary," he murmurs. I'd forgotten. It's our 5th anniversary. 5 years since I woke up with a second chance. 5 years since I chose to stay and fight. "Happy anniversary, Ashpaestam." "Nishasham," I reply. In my first life, we were divorced by now. In this one, we're just beginning.